My name is Evelyn Vance. I'm 62 years old, and my son signed me up for a radio contest called The Absolute Worst Mom. I heard my full name echo through the speakers of my little kitchen radio on a Tuesday morning while I was making hot tea. My son, Julian, didn't even bother using a fake name. His wife, Whitney, grabbed the mic and dropped a line that made my blood run cold. A line thousands of people were listening to on their morning commute. She's 62. She can't keep her house clean, and she has absolutely no idea how to manage her money. The DJ let out a loud, obnoxious laugh that rattled the little radio on my counter. "A total nightmare for her poor kids, huh?" he joked. Julian, my own flesh and blood, muttered a soft agreement that I recognized instantly. They were competing for a prize, a complete kitchen remodel sponsored by a local home design store. To win, they had to tell the most tragic, exasperating story possible. And I was their winning ticket. I didn't cry. I didn't smash my mug against the wall. I simply turned off the radio, plunging the kitchen into absolute silence. I walked over to the window and looked out at the massive main house. I lived in the small backyard cottage. 3 years ago, Julian and Whitney had convinced me to hand over the big house after my husband's sudden passing. They argued they needed the space to start a family and that it would be easier to take care of me if we were close by. The reality was completely different. I paid the property taxes, the electric bills for both houses, and stocked their pantry every couple of weeks because they were always short on cash. Now, they were parading me in front of thousands of listeners as a useless old woman, a burden who couldn't even clean up after herself. I took a deep breath. They had crossed a line that no empty apology could ever erase. I walked over to my desk, pulled out my black leather ledger, and patiently began crossing off numbers. I wasn't going to scream. I was just going to shut off the faucet. Making breakfast after your own family publicly humiliates you is a strange, eye-opening experience. I brewed some coffee, made some toast, and sat down at my small wooden table to review the ledger. Whitney always told her friends I was disorganized and that my mind was slipping. The real irony was that every single receipt bill and bank transfer was meticulously filed by date and color-coded in my desk drawer. They depended entirely on my supposed disorganization to maintain their expensive lifestyle. At 10 o'clock, sharp, the door to my cottage swung open without a knock. Julian walked across the yard, looking sharp in his pristine work clothes shirts. I had ironed myself the previous Sunday because Whitney claimed the iron ruined her manicures. "Hey, Mom, do you have any bread and eggs?" he asked, throwing open my fridge without looking at me, treating it like his personal pantry. "We're completely out of everything up at the big house." I watched him closely from the table, taking in his relaxed, completely unbothered attitude. "Did you win the radio contest?" I asked, my voice flat and entirely empty of emotion. Julian froze instantly. He slowly closed the refrigerator door. So you heard that? Mom, come on, it was just a joke. A bit for the morning show. Don't take it to heart, you know how local radio is. Whitney specifically said I can't keep my house clean. "It's just radio," he huffed, clearly annoyed that I wasn't laughing along. "People exaggerate to win. We really needed that kitchen remodel, the cabinets are ancient. You should be happy we landed the grand prize." I nodded, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. "I understand completely. The prize made it okay to lie." "Exactly. Don't make a whole drama out of this." He grabbed half a loaf of bread, half a dozen eggs, and turned on his heel. I didn't try to stop him, and I didn't demand an apology. Julian's words gave me all the clarity I needed. To them, my dignity was just a bargaining chip. The blasting air conditioning inside the downtown bank branch was a welcome relief from the midday heat. I walked in with a firm step and sat down across from Marcus, a sharp, diligent young banker who had managed my accounts for years. "Mrs. Vance?" He smiled, adjusting his glasses. "What can I do for you today? Here to balance the books. I want to cancel the 2 authorized user credit cards linked to my primary account," I said, calmly sliding my ID across the desk. "The ones under my son Julian's name and his wife Whitney's name." Marcus typed rapidly into his computer, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. "Of course. Is there an issue with the cards, lost or stolen?" "Not at all. I'm just doing some drastic restructuring of my personal expenses." I also instructed him to immediately revoke the automatic autopay authorizations for all utilities tied to the main house. The electric bill, the lawn irrigation system, the high-speed fiber internet, and the gas would no longer be deducted from my late husband's pension. From that day on, paper bills would be sent directly to the main mailbox under the residents' names. After leaving the bank, I walked across the street to the insurance agency. The sedan Julian drove to his office every day was registered in my name, and I was paying for premium full coverage insurance. I downgraded it to the bare minimum liability coverage required by law and removed Julian as an authorized driver. It was a simple 20-minute errand that saved me hundreds of dollars a year. I walked home. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt incredibly light. For 3 years, I had quietly propped up an invisible financial safety net that allowed them to play house and look successful in front of their friends. They thought I was just an old lady stuck in her ways, incapable of standing up for herself. When I got back, I saw Whitney parking her car carrying bags from an expensive boutique. The clock was officially ticking for her. By Friday afternoon, the tense silence hanging over the property finally shattered. I was out in the yard, peacefully pruning the rose bushes, when Whitney came bursting out of the main house, leaving the front door wide open. She was clutching her phone, her face flushed with pure rage. "Evelyn," she yelled, completely forgetting the sweet mom routine she always pulled when neighbors or guests were around. My card was declined at the high-end grocery store down the street. It was absolutely mortifying. I had to leave the entire week's groceries right there at the register in front of everyone. "Did you forget to make the monthly transfer?" I carefully placed my pruning shears into my wicker basket. "No, Whitney, I didn't forget. I permanently canceled that card last Tuesday." Whitney blinked rapidly, caught between disbelief and fury. "What? Why on earth would you do something so crazy without warning us? You know perfectly well we use that joint account to cover the house expenses." "Your house expenses." I corrected, pulling off my gardening gloves with slow, deliberate movements. "Since you announced to the entire town on the radio that I don't know how to manage my money, I decided to simplify my finances so I won't be a burden. Starting today, I am only responsible for the expenses of my cottage." "Oh my God, Evelyn, this is about the radio show." She scoffed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "You are being incredibly spiteful. It was just a stupid contest. We needed that new kitchen, and now you're punishing us by taking food out of our mouths." "Nobody is taking anything out of your mouth, Whitney. You both have full-time jobs. Now you can manage your own money like the functional, mature adults you claim to be." I picked up my basket and walked into my cozy home, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the blinds, I watched her frantically typing away on her phone to call Julian. She was livid, but I felt nothing but absolute peace. It didn't take long for Julian to react. That very night, he pounded on my door. "Mom, what is this crazy stunt with canceling the cards?" "Whitney won't stop crying," he demanded. But I didn't even let him step inside. I told him flat out it was time to start paying his own bills and shut the door. The weekend passed in a freezing, heavy silence. Monday morning, a large van with Navarro Kitchens and Design printed on the side pulled up to the driveway. A burly man carrying a clipboard got out to take measurements for the big contest prize. I walked out to meet him long before Whitney could even look out her window. "Good morning," I greeted him warmly. Are you here for the remodel? Yes, ma'am. We're here to do the official estimate and take measurements for the Vance family's radio prize. Your daughter-in-law is expecting us. I smiled peacefully and pulled a notarized copy of the property deed out of my apron pocket, something I had prepared a few days prior. My name is Evelyn Vance. I am the sole legal owner of this entire property, including both the main house and the cottage. I have not authorized any remodeling, major renovations, or structural alterations here. I need you to cancel the project immediately, as I will not be allowing any workers onto my property. The contractor looked over the document, his brow furrowed in confusion. Wait, this isn't your son's house. They said on the radio that they owned it. No, sir. He is simply a guest under my roof. The man gave a professional nod and handed the paperwork back to me. I understand completely, ma'am. Without the actual owner's signature, we can't touch the house. I'll notify the station and cancel the order. He climbed back into his van and drove off. Whitney rushed out to the driveway just as the vehicle rounded the corner, looking around wildly for the crew. "Where's the contractor?" she asked, completely bewildered. "He left," I replied. "Turns out you can't remodel a house you don't actually own." News of the sudden prize cancellation traveled fast. When the radio station found out from the contractor that the winners weren't the actual property owners and had lied publicly about their living situation, they stripped them of the prize, immediately citing a severe violation of the contest rules. Whitney stopped speaking to me entirely, walking through the yard as if I were invisible. Julian ignored me every time our paths crossed. I simply went about my quiet, daily routine. By the middle of the month, reality finally knocked on their door. The mail carrier dropped an unusually thick envelope into the main house's mailbox. It was the consolidated utility bill for electricity, water, and gas. Up until that point, I had always paid it quietly through automatic withdrawal. Because the main house kept the central air conditioning blasting all day, left the outdoor floodlights on all night, and Whitney loved taking long, boiling hot baths, the total was always astronomical. I had grown used to absorbing that monthly financial hit. They had absolutely no clue. That afternoon, I saw Julian walk out into the yard with the open envelope in his hand. His face was completely bloodless, a sickly shade of gray. He walked up to my door, hesitated for a long moment, and knocked very softly. I opened it. He was holding the paper, his hand visibly trembling. "Mom, is this the real bill for this month Gold Star usage or whatever, it's nearly $500? "Yes, Central AC draws a lot of power in the dead of summer," I said neutrally. "But why did it come to us? You always take care of it." "I explained this to you last week, Julian. I canceled all my automatic bill pays. That amount is strictly your share of the utilities. The bill for my small cottage comes separately, and it's already paid." He swallowed hard, looking like a terrified little boy. "Mom, we don't have this kind of money right now. We had to put our groceries on a credit card, and the interest is drowning us. Can you please help us out just this once?" I looked at him coldly. As Whitney so loudly proclaimed, "I don't know how to manage my money. I'm sure you two will figure out a better way." I shut the door in his face. On Tuesday morning, the crisis reached a breaking point. Julian was frantically rushing to get ready for work. I watched from my window as he bolted toward the blue sedan parked in the gravel driveway. He shoved his hand into his jacket pocket, searching for the keys, but came up empty. He patted down his pants, looking completely frantic. I was sitting on my little porch, enjoying a cup of chamomile tea with the car keys resting in plain sight on the wrought iron table. "Mom, have you seen my car keys?" he called out, practically running over to me. "I am going to be so incredibly late for a major meeting." "I have them," I said, picking up the keychain and slipping it calmly into my jacket pocket. "Give them to me, Mom. I don't have time for games. The meeting starts at 9. I shook my head slowly. "It's not a game. I updated the policy. The insurance now only covers me as the exclusive driver. You are no longer authorized to operate this vehicle. If you were to get into an accident, it would put me in a massive financial hole. And as a disorganized old woman, I simply can't take that risk. Julian ran his hands through his hair, right on the verge of tears. Mom, this is the car I used to get to the office. You gave it to me 2 years ago. I let you use it as a courtesy. I never put the title in your name because I was the one paying the monthly notes, the maintenance, and the tires. I need to run some errands at the market today, so I'll be driving it. You can take the bus. It stops at the corner every 20 minutes. This is ridiculous and vindictive. He exploded, his face turning bright red. What am I supposed to do? Whitney already left and took her car. Adapt to your reality. I finished taking another sip of tea. He spun around, cursed loudly, and kicked a loose stone before trudging off toward the bus stop. Later that afternoon, my friend Glenda stopped by to visit. Gossip travels fast, Evelyn. Glenda laughed. Whitney was over at the bakery crying to anyone who would listen that you're suffocating them. I'm not suffocating them, I smiled. I'm just giving them their independence back. 9 days after that infamous radio broadcast, the mounting tension in the main house became almost unbearable. From my quiet cottage, I could clearly hear doors slamming and muffled screaming, matching the toxic rhythm of their marriage. Without my permanent financial cushion to protect them, their real issues were bubbling to the surface. Whitney couldn't handle the thought of cutting back on her luxuries, and Julian was too weak to tell her that they simply didn't have the funds. While I was carefully watering my hydrangeas, a medium-sized moving truck pulled into the driveway. I watched discreetly. 2 movers got out and began carrying heavy boxes out of the house. They weren't moving out voluntarily. They were repossessing things. Whitney came storming out, completely furious. I told you guys I would make the damn payment next week, she screamed at one of the movers. I'm sorry, ma'am, but the lease on this designer furniture is a full 2 months past due. We have strict orders to repossess it. The worker replied, completely unfazed, as he carried out an elegant dining chair. It turned out that the expensive sectional sofa and the oak dining table Whitney loved bragging about online weren't even theirs. They were rented. Without my covert monthly financial injections, their checks bounced. Julian arrived, walking home from the bus stop, looking utterly miserable, and the 2 of them started screaming at each other right there on the front lawn. Neither one of them would take accountability. Taking advantage of the distraction, I walked over to the large storage shed in the backyard. That was where they kept all the extra things that didn't fit in the house. Expensive road bikes, golf clubs, high-end tools. It was my shed. I took out a brand new heavy-duty industrial padlock, snapped it onto the reinforced door, and slid the only key into my pocket. The boundaries were finally physically drawn. If they wanted extra storage space for their luxuries, they would have to pay for a storage unit down the road. I was reclaiming every single square inch of my property, slowly, methodically, and ruthlessly. The endless subsidies disguised as family favors were officially over. That same night, the quiet stillness of the yard was broken by the vibration of my phone. It was Julian. I could have easily ignored it without a shred of guilt, but I decided to answer to close this chapter for good. I knew he was sitting on the cold steps of the main house barely 20 yards away from my front door, but he no longer dared to ring my bell. Mom, please don't do this, he pleaded. His voice had completely lost the smug arrogance he displayed on that radio show. There wasn't a trace left of that mocking, superior tone. He sounded completely exhausted and broken. Whitney says she's going to stay with her parents for a few days because she can't handle the pressure. We don't have the money to pay the electric bill before they shut it off. You took the car I need for work, and the house is literally half empty because they took the furniture. You are ruining our lives. I settled back into my armchair, looking through the window at his dark, slumped silhouette under the moonlight. I didn't ruin anything, Julian. You two built a fantasy life on my dime, and then you went on a local radio station to publicly humiliate me for a prize you didn't even need. All I did was stop funding it. Whatever collapsed this week fell because it never had a foundation of its own. It was a massive mistake. The contest, it was an incredibly stupid thing to do. I'll apologize to you publicly if you want, Mom. I'll call the radio station first thing tomorrow morning. I don't need a public apology. I need my peace of mind. And you two urgently need to learn how to live within your means. Mom, please help me. Just for this 1 month. I promise we'll look for a cheaper place. But don't just throw me out on the street like this. The silence stretched out heavy and cold. I will give you exactly 30 days, I said, finally, my voice like steel. 30 days to pack up your things and get out of my house. I hung up the phone. There was no big dramatic scene, and there was no cinematic reconciliation. Julian and Whitney moved out exactly 28 days later into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the drab outskirts of town. The day they loaded up their last boxes, Whitney wouldn't even look at me. She climbed into the passenger seat of the moving truck with her face set in a tight, bitter grimace. Julian, keeping his head down, left the original keys to the main house on my kitchen counter. He looked like he had aged 5 years in a single month. There were no warm hugs, no promises to visit on Sundays, and no nostalgic tears, just a cold, quiet nod that acknowledged the massive wall built between us was permanent and unbreakable. A week after their bitter departure, I hired a crew of local painters to fix up the scuffed walls of the main house. I decided to move back into the wide-open spaces of my home. The small backyard cottage that had been my refuge was finally transformed into a beautiful, sun-drenched sewing and reading room. My personal finances quickly flourished without the dead weight of their unsustainable lifestyle dragging me down. I even started taking long weekend trips with my friend Glenda. One sunny afternoon, the radio was playing softly in my kitchen. I was listening to a classical station while peacefully putting together dinner. There was no expensive rented furniture to worry about, and no someone else's electric bills keeping me up at night. I paused for a moment to look out the big bay window into the yard. Everything was immaculately clean and wonderfully quiet. The folks in the neighborhood looked at me a bit differently now. Some knew the whole story, while others only guessed at pieces of it. At 62 years old, I had uncovered a fundamental truth. A mother's love doesn't mean being an endless, unconditional doormat. Sometimes the ultimate act of self-love is letting the people who disrespect you face the natural consequences of their own actions. I picked up my glass of red wine and smiled out at the garden.